Seattle, one of the biggest metropolises in the United States today. The question is, how? What event happened that put Seattle on the map? Well, in order to find out, we'll have to go back in time to the year 1896.
The Klondike Gold Rush is one of the most profound events that changed Seattle's history. It brought in over $100 million to Seattle and boosted its economy and made it the social capital of the United States for many years.
It all began in August of 1896 by a man named George Carmack, his Canadian Native American brother-in-law, Skookum Jim, and their nephew, Dawson Charlie. They were traveling south of the Klondike River in search of gold, so they headed to Bonanza Creek. There, they glanced into the creek and saw something shiny. It was a gold nugget. After a while, they kept searching and searching, and they found more and more of this amazing creation of nature. The gold was discovered in Rabbit Creek, which was now known as Bonanza Creek, located in the Klondike Fields in Alaska. At this point, Seattle's economy was just starting to grow again. The rebuilding of the city began after the devastating Seattle fire of 1889, when it burnt down most of Seattle's commercial district. Along with people's demand for lumber, the increase in shipping activity, the construction frenzy set off by the Great Seattle Fire, the economy was slowly rising, but not enough to suffice. When Seattleites thought they couldn't have any more bad luck, a certain event happened that helped it rise to its full potential economically, socially, and all within a period of 2 years.
It wasn't until July 16, 1897, when people realized that this was no ordinary rumor. The steamship Excelsior arrived in San Francisco with 68 men on board and $500,000 in gold from the gold fields. People all over were astonished. One day later, the Portland, a ship from the gold fields as well, arrived in Seattle with 68 men and $700,000 in gold. News spread very quickly, and people realized that this was the real deal. The Klondike Gold Rush was the real deal. So now the race was on to the Klondike Fields in the Yukon Territory as 100,000 men seek the easiest way of obtaining their fortunes. There was only one problem. It wasn't as easy as they thought. We interviewed park guide Nicole Worley at the Klondike Gold Rush Museum in Seattle. It used to be the Cadillac Hotel, which many miners stayed in when they passed through Seattle on their way to the gold fields.
So 70,000 of the 100,000 people that came to the gold rush, which was in Canada, came through the city of Seattle. So that meant Seattle needed places for them to buy their goods and supplies. So outfitters popped up all over Pioneer Square, and they provided these miners with the supplies they needed. So before the gold rush, merchants were making about $300,000. And 8 months after the gold rush, they're making $25 million. So the gold rush really put Seattle on the map and helped them develop into the prosperous city they are today.
Seattle was obvious to be the outfitting center for any prospector with the slightest intentions of heading to the gold fields. One way that Seattle made sure of this was advertising, and the Seattle Chamber of Commerce was in charge of that. For instance, this letter was written in November 1897, proposing an idea to a Sir, if he could ask his employees to promote Seattle in the newspaper back east and to popularize Seattle as the #1 outfitting center.
This piece of evidence can prove that Seattle was the outfitting center for the Klondike Gold Rush and how it helped its economy to thrive. As Secretary and Executive Officer of the newly founded Bureau of Information of the Seattle Chamber of Commerce, Erastus Brainerd was a very important and monumental figure during the Klondike Gold Rush era. To prove Seattle was the middleman for all supplies and resources for the Klondike Gold Rush, stores and businesses were very crowded and very busy. According to one miner by the name of Alfred McMichael, who was passing through Seattle during the rush, wrote in his diary, "Seattle, this is a busy town. Vancouver and Victoria are like country villages in comparison. At all times, the streets are like Woodward on Saturday nights." These are a few newspapers that displayed advertisements for companies and businesses that offered supplies for the rigorous journey ahead. It also shows hotels and inns that provided lodging for prospectors and transients who were traveling through Seattle. One word: supplies. This was the most important priority for the miners, other than safety and the thought of becoming rich, that is, and Seattle was a perfect place to get them. Well, evidence shows that business owners and stores' profits shot up 83 times more than the original earnings from the previous years, all because of the presence of the Klondike Gold Rush. The money earned from the Klondike Gold Rush was a very important effect on the citizens of Seattle, helping business and the city's reputation thrive. The estimated population in Seattle of year 1896, which was 1 year before the rush really started, was just over 40,000. By the end of the gold rush, the population was over 80,000.
The Chamber of Commerce is an extremely helpful organization during the Klondike Gold Rush. One of the many things they did was work with the Seattle Post-Intelligencer to make an exclusive copy on the Klondike Gold Rush. It was published October 13, 1897, and it was the largest newspaper run, west of Chicago, printing 212,000 copies. This newspaper alone made thousands of people in the East come to Seattle and head to the Klondike Fields. In 1898, the federal government decided to establish an assay office in Seattle because of all the miners traveling through Seattle with so much gold. The assay office weighs and evaluates the gold that flowed through the city of Seattle. Government officials then melted and molded the gold into bars, stamped the bars with the federal seal, and sent them east to the mint in Philadelphia. The miners then received certified government checks in exchange for the gold deposits. Seattle's economy just kept growing as thousands of prospectors moved through Seattle exchanging gold for money. On the day that the assay office opened, it handled more than $1 million in gold, and within a decade, it had handled more than $200 million in gold. We interviewed an underground tour guide and asked him what the effect was the Klondike Gold Rush had on Seattle. Here's his response.
The birth of vaudeville was actually started by a vaudeville theater chain called the Pantages. The biggest in the country was started by a Klondike-era bartender from Dawson City who started the Pantages theater chain here. And John Nordstrom liquidated a claim in Dawson to come down here and open up a shoe store that is now a national chain. 1899, the city stole a totem pole from the island village of Tongass and put it up in the middle of what is now Pioneer Square so that Seattle would be forever considered the gateway to the gold fields in Alaska.
On October 18, 1899, the Chamber of Commerce presented a stolen totem pole from the Tlingit village on the island of Tongass in Alaska. Unfortunately, many people argued with this action because it was stolen. After many disputes, they eventually kept the totem pole, which is standing tall here today in Pioneer Square, proving that Seattle was and forever will be the gateway to the Klondike Gold Rush. As the city was becoming more and more well known, it clinched its title as the outfitting center to Alaska for good. This was the biggest impact the Klondike Gold Rush had on Seattle, because with this title, Seattle was also able to be on firm ground and make Seattle the gateway to the Asian, Hawaiian, Philippine imports and exports, as well as Seattle rose in the eyes of major corporations. By the year 1900 to 1901, an estimated 2,500 building permits were issued. This meant that around 2,500 new buildings were built in the city of Seattle. Not only that, but the average money earned from the gold that was imported from Alaska of the year 1899 was equivalent to about $36,000 a day, with a grand total of $13 million that year. Seattle also had $1,000 in goods shipped to Manala, Honolulu, and British Columbia every day in the year 1899. The Klondike Gold Rush is a major turning point for Seattle. It came in a time of need and put Seattle on the map and made it the well-known city of today. From a ragtag rebuilding city in the west, turned into a metropolis full of opportunities for money and one of the biggest ports in the United States. That is the effect the Klondike Gold Rush had on Seattle.
Oh, come to the place where they struck it rich.